Everybody, it's Romania Black, and has anything crazy been happening with the Apothecary Diaries as of late? Oh, nothing much. Just Jinshi had an assassination attempt, and MaoMao saved him, and we found out Suirei was going to be dead, but is now not dead, and is maybe the Moriarty to MaoMao Sherlock. And someone said in the comments, someone said in the Discord that they thought Locken was like the Moriarty to MaoMao Sherlock, and I was like, I will think that Suirei is for right now. I mean, Locken could prove to be Milverton, so there's that, which I wouldn't be surprised by, or maybe Suirei's Milverton. Might have to think about that analogy. But yeah, things are crazy. Things are crazy. And we ended the last episode with Pairin, who has captured the heart of Lihaku, and she's apparently potentially going to be bought out. And it seems like it might be like another situation like with Locken and MaoMao's mom. So, oh, and by the way, Jinshi and Gaoshun are not eunuchs. They're not eunuchs. They're just drinking some liquid anti-Viagra so they don't have to have boners. And it's a lot, y'all. And we have this episode, 22, 23. We have 4 episodes left of this season, which is wild to me. But the good thing is that we really don't have a lot of time to wait between season 1 and season 2, which is great. Super excited about that. But we need to get into some comments. And also, I've read a chapter of The Last Eunuch of China, which is just also really cool as well. So let's get into this. I want to talk real quick. Anime Annie pointed out that consort Gyokyo, her family is based in the Western province. So we have potentially Lolan, who is potentially she's supposedly from the south, but she's dressed like she's from the north. And then Gyokyo's from the west. We don't know about Li Shu or Li Hua. It would be funny if Li Hua was from the east because they're like a dynamic. But I think that's interesting. So good to note that there's a little bit of a difference politically there between her and Lolan. That's going to be interesting to note. Also, she could be pregnant. So Jinshi just wants his dad brother to have another son. Jinshi just wants a brother so that he doesn't have to be king. He doesn't have to be emperor. He's like, you take this. I don't want this responsibility. He's like Jean-Ralphio in Parks and Rec. He's like, I'm not ready for that responsibility. I just want to go settle down with this apothecary girl and have her like make mushroom soup and we just have a great life. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. And Gaoshun would like him to settle down, but I'm like, Gaoshun, then do some better matchmaking. So, I did want to point out that Katerina Kusarova 2937 pointed this out because I don't know how MaoMao's debt works. I didn't know if she had a contract, if the brothel owner was going to try to buy her out or sell her. And so they clarified. So thank you for finally clarifying. And the mods were like, yeah, you're good. You can read that. And I was like, okay, good. So they said, okay, maybe to clarify one thing, as I see there is confusion. Yes. The Verdigris house can't sell MaoMao. She is not and never has been a courtesan under the contract with the house. Therefore, the old madame can't sell her. What happened is that MaoMao put herself in debt with the old lady over Lihaku visiting Pairin. Lihaku, this is your fault if you hadn't bought all these things, but they established that Pairin's pretty expensive. So when Jinshi found out her working part-time was as a courtesan job, she'd been working off her debt. That's why she was serving tea, all of that. So since then, Jinshi has came and paid off her debt to the old woman, so she is free to go work for him. The confusion came with the sisters giving her the send-off like they would to the bought-out courtesan. But she has never been a courtesan. She has never had any contract with the brothel to be bought. She's always just been the apothecary, therefore she can't be sold off to anyone. Thank you. That makes me feel so much better going into this episode, being like, okay, MaoMao doesn't have a contract with her. Jinshi paid off all her debts. We're all good. I think also it was the fact that she was getting money. She was sending money to the brothel, I thought, I thought at the very beginning she was getting money and it was going to her kidnappers, but then I also thought it was going to the brothel, and that to me felt like it was paying off a debt. I don't know why I thought that. It just was, that was in my mind somehow, and it just lodged itself in there and then mutated. So thank you, Katerina, for clearing the record. Good to know. Read the Best points out that these two next comments are from episode 15. So we're going back a little bit. It's the raw fish episode. Read the Best says the seaweed scene in the book for episode 15 goes along the lines of MaoMao had Goshen prepare a kitchen for her that wasn't attached to Jinshi's residence, so she wouldn't feel, obligated or anything. I don't understand her reasoning, but there was something about not wanting to implicate someone if things went badly. Well, MaoMao blowing something up and not wanting Jinshi's house to be wrecked for it, that feels in character. But there was also quite a few people or officials there that were watching the entire thing. She ate the good seaweed first, and Jinshi made her throw it up. Then they had the entire conversation they have in the anime, and she ate the bad seaweed before Jinshi could stop her, and he made her throw up again. So it seems like it was just a little bit more of an elaborate scene. I kind of liked that it was intimate between Gaoshun and Basin and Jinshi, who we just found out that Basin Gaoshun's son, by the way. Lots of things happened last episode. A lot of things happened. And finally, Aerith, 1202, said, I think the reason for Jinshi to bang his head in episode 15 on the pillar is because MaoMao looked so cute, and the phrase welcome home, or in Japanese, okaeri naisai, is usually used in an affectionate setting of a wife welcoming her husband home after a tired day of work. It basically blew a circuit in his head imagining MaoMao as his wife. And I bring that comment up because now that we know that Jinshi is not a eunuch and he's been drinking like liquid anti-boners, the fact that he had to hit his head against the pillar to make sure that he didn't have an erection from what MaoMao told him makes a lot more sense. That was a bit of foreshadowing, and I should have noticed it when it happened. So fun times. Anyway, those are my comments from that. And I want to talk real quickly about The Last Eunuch of China. It's really sad. I'm on chapter 12, or I was on chapter 12, and there's only 14 chapters. The book definitely feels like by the time you leave the Emperor, it definitely feels like things are winding down. And it's all just kind of like the golden years of Sun Yao-Ting's life, which were the years of working for the emperor, are kind of ending. And so it's like the post-revolution in China has brought about this entirely new era. And to Sun Yao-Ting, you can definitely tell it doesn't feel as, I don't want to say the word magical, but it doesn't feel as special as those times, or relevant as those times were back then. So it says, after the liberation, we said last time that Sun Yao-Ting had been a landlord. So he basically, at the start of chapter 12, he gets accused of possibly murder. And I was like, wait, what? But one of the eunuchs commits suicide, and Sun Yao-Ting was like, for some reason had left near the scene of the crime around the time that it happened. So people were suspicious of him. But basically, Sun Yao-Ting is able to back himself up. And what's important is that a lot of the other eunuchs kind of vouch for him, and they're like, oh yeah, he wouldn't do that. And we saw him later, so we're totally fine. So that was it. Something else happens, and suddenly in this chapter, Sun Yao-Ting has an adopted son. And I was like, did we have that adopted son earlier? I don't remember. I was like, when did this happen? But he has an adopted son. His name is Sun Chengnian. And I think maybe they mentioned him in one previous chapter, but he has a wife now. They're doing great, but that's his adopted son. And they kind of talk about how Chengnian is kind of simple. He's just very straightforward, like just a straightforward farm eunuch or farm boy that has a wife and everything. But him and Sun Yao-Ting, they basically handle a bunch of things. His mother passes away, which is really sad in the book, and he mourns her and everything and gets her like a nice coffin, and everybody kind of talks about it and all this. But then, speaking of which, the Zhou Zong, who was one of the first people to take him in at the very beginning of the book, he finds out that he has a terminal illness, and his wife comes to visit Sun Yao-Ting, and they try to like go and get him buried in this specific temple. But when they arrived to the temple, it reminded me a lot of Spirited Away, where the old amusement park where things are abandoned and kind of left alone. And so they go to the temple that Zhang wants to be buried in, but by the time they get there, it's dilapidated and falling in. And the guy's like, there's no way you can bury him here. It's not going to work. So they have to find a cemetery in Beishang, about 15 kilometers outside of the city of Tianjin. So it's this really kind of somber moment where you have these characters you started the story with, and the one character dies, and you suddenly realize that the things that seem so glamorous and magical and ethereal in the past, you kind of get to peel back that layer of paint and see how just easily eroded it is. And it's like, it sucks. So anyway, the government like comes in. They talk about, there was this one section where they talk about Chairman Mao coming in, and they made a point about that, which I thought was really interesting. And there was a moment with Chairman Mao, like he visits the temple that they're at, and where was it? Yeah, it said he gives all of the eunuchs this white paper lotus flower to wear, and the officials there tell the eunuchs that these flowers have symbolic meaning. You are like lotus flowers, which have emerged unstained from the filth. And the book says, and I quote, Sun Yat-ting did not take it as a compliment. Why do they think we come from filth? He muttered to himself. I was like, just him being like, it felt very condescending for them to kind of talk down like, oh, well, you were these filthy eunuchs, but now we've made you clean. And he's like, you don't know me. It's basically the mindset that you get from it, right? So they also talk about at the Temple of Prosperity. I thought this part was amazing. Apparently, a bunch of nuns from Beijing come into the temple with the eunuchs. And obviously the nuns are celibate and all of this, but they have these incident with the toilets in the temple where it's kind of gross. A lot of the eunuchs, like, they had a system where if you were in the bathroom, there wasn't like a lock on the door. You just kind of basically said, hey, are you in there? And people were like, yes. You'd cough and go, ahem, and somebody would ahem back, and that would signal. Well, once the nuns got there, a bunch of horny eunuchs started to invade the bathrooms and getting in the nuns' spaces, which is highly inappropriate. And the nuns started to have quarrels and fights. It says during the fights, the nuns would sometimes resort to shoes and rolling pins and the crudest swear words available in the local dialect. The eunuchs, though advanced in years, were hardly less combative. And in the meantime, a few young nuns, unable to resist the allure of money, succumbed to the amorous advances of the eunuchs, and thus eunuch-nun couples were occasionally seen roaming the streets. I'm like, these platonic relationships between, or I guess not platonic, they're romantic. It's just between these nuns and eunuchs. It's a wild chapter, y'all. But anyway, so that happens. The Chairman Mao thing happens. Several eunuchs, unfortunately, they end up dying for various reasons around this time. And if you think about it, Sun Yat-ting, he's starting to get up in age. And so by this point, he's like in his 40s. And you can really start to see a shift in how society views the eunuchs, especially because some of them are starting to get older in society and because they're not being used anymore. So it's very interesting. But yeah, and so he mainly, the last thing was that he visits one of his friends who is a eunuch that was writing a manuscript about a 4-volume work of anecdotal accounts from the Jing Palace. And Sun Yat-ting was like, can I look at your manuscript? And he's like, well, return it whenever you're finished and don't show it to anyone. So he did, and Sun Yat-ting read a few pages and was convinced that the book had great historical value. Shin had recorded in great detail his experiences in the imperial palace for several dozen years. Written in small characters in regular Chinese script, the manuscript was also a fine work of calligraphy. A few days later, Jin came back to take it back. I've just received a publishing offer. That's great, said Sun Yat-ting. I'll wait to read the printed book. However, the printed book did not find its way. The next time Sun Yat-ting asked about it, Jin heaved a long sigh. At first, the publisher told me that they would print my book and pay me 500 yuan. But I did not hear from them for a long time after they took away my manuscript. And you know what the problem is? Someone has accused my work of eulogizing Guangzhou and Shishi. What nonsense. What will happen next? Sun Yat-ting asked. Many people are still waiting to read your published work. Well, they told me they wouldn't publish the book as it is. They wanted to have someone revise and edit it, but I said no. It is my book, and I won't let anyone change a single word of it. Finally, Jin took back his manuscript. I'll hide it in the mountains and wait for the highest bid, he declared, quoting an old saying. So I was really sad about that. I was like, I kind of wanted to read the other book because I want to hear somebody else's accounts, but I guess it was never published. So I wonder if that also encouraged Sun Yat-ting to like tell his own account, to be like, well, I want this to be published. And also this is years and years later. So different times, different audiences wanting to hear about those stories. But yeah, I thought that was crazy. And I've talked for nearly 14 minutes. So we might as well get started, eh? Let me get this ready and get this all set up. Yeah, get that ready. Awesome. So I hope y'all enjoy this, but I'm super excited. I'm ready to start episode 21 of the Apothecary Diaries. Hope y'all are too. But we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. I went ahead and looked up a couple things real quick before we went any further, I wanted to look up some stuff compared in relation to Pairin, because I was like, wait, what? And there is a scientific way, and we'll explain it later in the reaction. But yeah, I really came to like Lihaku in this episode. He has a heart of gold, and he's just a sweet Labrador of a man, and I really like him. So this episode is called How to Buy Out a Contract. And I kind of like that throughout this entire episode, the whole process of paper and making it is kind of explored. So that's kind of fun. But also the doctor. Can we go ahead and talk about the doctor? His whole story, I was not expecting in this. So MaoMao is helping him clean out the pharmacy. And she's like, if they asked somebody else to do it, they could have swapped out the medicine. What would we do? She's like, we need to do it together because we're the ones, we know that we're both, gonna be fine and we're not gonna do anything illegal, right? So I like that MaoMao basically threatens the quack doctor to help her. She's like, we're not gonna get punished if we don't handle these drugs properly. And I like that she's the cat and he's like Hamtaro. He's like a little hamster version of himself. Adorable. And her little tail is swishing. I like it. So she's like, we need to clean this up before the humidity gets too bad, which true. If you've ever worked outside in humidity, it sucks. And you want to get done before that ends up messing up things. So he brings out these little sweet potato ball dumplings on this nice paper. And she makes the note about how he's from a rich family, which does beg the question of why he's there as a eunuch. And so I like that we get this little moment where she kind of realizes that the quack doctor, who seemed like he has had it all, he seemed like he's just been very at ease without any problems this whole season. Come to find out, his whole situation is kind of messed up and crazy. So what we end up finding out about him is that his family makes parchment paper. And they've been the purveyors of the palace for a long time. And she's like, I love that MaoMao's instantly like, this would be great for measuring chemicals. Can I get a discount on these? She's already thinking up a strategy to get her own set of paper. She's like, maybe I can sweet talk him into getting some. But he says we used to make a ton of profit and produce more paper. But then he talks about how the empress, he's like, the family wanted me to take over the business. And he's like, but the previous emperor's mother banned the cutting of trees. Now, that is not, it took me a second to realize. I was like, the previous emperor's mother. So the current emperor, it's not his mom. It's not Jinshi's grandma/mom. It's not her. It's the previous emperor, Jinshi's grandpa. It's his mom. So this goes back quite a ways. It's going back a few generations. So it'd basically be Jinshi's it'd be Jinshi's great-grandmother is the one that banned the cutting of trees, which in turn caused the materials that they used to have to change, and that caused the quality to ruin the trade and the business. And our family took the blame for it, which, based on reading this, does not surprise me, because even when it's the royal family making the decisions, it's the families that are under them that bear the brunt of the responsibility. So even though it was a policy enacted by the matriarch that was the emperor's mom, they're going to take responsibility for it because they're the company that owns the paper. Isn't that something? So they had no money left, and his older sister went to the rear palace. The sad thing is, he joined the rear palace but never met her, which means a number of things. Either she was bought out, or she was let go, or she died. It's there's definitely a dark undercurrent of his story of being I never met my older sister again. And it's oh. So he's like, my sister went to the rear palace. And when my younger said that she'd go too, I volunteered to come instead. And that part's crazy because essentially he's becoming a eunuch was less popular and was worth more money. Which is so sad because he basically did a Katniss Everdeen in Hunger Games and was I volunteer as tribute, and was I'll just become a eunuch and go, and you won't have to. You can. And at that point, if their family is losing money, his thought process was probably well, you can marry rich. He's I'm the heir of this company, but we're not making money, so I'm inheriting nothing. So he's you might be able to go out and marry a rich man that has money that can take care of you. I'll just become a eunuch and go to the palace and maybe see my older sister, and we'll go from there. That takes a lot of courage. At the beginning of the series, I feel like a lot of people might write the doctor off as being like, a coward or someone that just is like, I even wrote him off as being kind of sleazy at the beginning because I didn't know him. But now that you get to know his character, it's like, oh shit, you had to make this huge sacrifice for your family and come here. And that took a lot of courage. And so even though he comes off kind of cowardly, it's like, and I wonder if this whole experience of MaoMao learning about the doctor's secret story and how hard he's had it and what he's gone through, I wonder if it seems like we're going to transition back to Lockin, which I'm glad because we have conveniently left him alone since episode 19. The last couple episodes, we've just left him alone to his own devices and he's sitting there just being all miserable. And I've been wanting us to go back and reevaluate that conversation and that moment where Jinshi walked away from him. And it seems like we're about to do that. And I wonder if this is like foreshadowing for MaoMao being like, okay, you've learned how this guy who seems to be a coward actually has a pretty compelling story behind him. Are we going to experience something similar with Lockin? And is her understanding of Lockin going to develop? I don't think that she's necessarily going to like him. And I don't think she should. He's done some horrible things, but she might come to understand him a little more by the end of the season. So that's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But yeah, he says that I never got to see my older sister. And they just kind of like brush that off like it's nothing. Like he just is like, he's like, yeah, my sister came to the rear palace. Now I'm here, but she's gone. I've never seen her. Like the implications of that are dark. That she's either dead or was kicked out, bought out, or... Because I'm like, even though that facility's big, he's been there a while, he could find her. Like, that place is a gossip central. If she was still around, he'd find her. But it sounds like she's long gone, which is crazy. And then MaoMao's like, well, he's been through more than I imagined. And it's like, yeah, but he still writes to his sister and tells her how everything is. Meanwhile, Lihaku, he's just going through it. He's just going through it. He just wants to see Pairin, and he's just dealing with a lot of stuff on his plate. And so then he comes in and says, oh, hey, little lady. And he's troubled and says, my sister sent me a letter. I want to go back through this. Our family might not be the palace purveyor anymore. And she's like, yeah, this isn't palace quality. It easily tears. So they're like, losing purveyor status would be a big deal in terms of sales. So she helps him by asking about how... She's like, well, why is this? They just told me they came up with a way to produce more paper. And she's like, well, how? What corners did they cut? What things are they using? And he's like, well, they started using oxen for hard labor. And that's when they find out about the oxen saliva. The oxen saliva that just happens to have a chemical compound that affects the glue. And that's what brings it all together. I'm like, of course. I love this little moment with the doctor because it allows MaoMao to basically be Sherlock. And anytime MaoMao gets to be Sherlock, it's a fun time. So yeah, they go through. I like that he essentially gives her the secret of how the glue is made for the paper. But at the same time, the one good thing is that MaoMao is not going to tell your secret. She wants to know for her Sherlock researching purposes, but it's like, you're fine. She's not going to tell anybody. So I do love this scene in this episode because it allows her and him to kind of develop their relationship, which, you know what, moving forward, if she's going to be in the rear palace, it might be nice to have the doctor there, to help out. So one can only hope. But yeah, this part was super cute. I loved it. And I love how they like test the spoons. One thing about MaoMao as well is that MaoMao is not judgmental at all. Like she talks about the arrowroot in the glue, but she also like licks the spoon when she mixes it. Like she doesn't think anything of putting on airs or being condescending or acting like she's above anyone. She's just like, here's our science experiment for the day. Here's what we're going to do. And if you want to do it too, then join me. And the doctor's like, okay, but it's very inclusive. And I like that about MaoMao. She doesn't judge anybody. She's very objective and inclusive. And she doesn't ever judge anyone for questioning some of her crazy, wacky ideas and her experimentation. So it's great. So yeah, the whole thing about the oxen saliva, he starts to write for his sister and then she heads out. So then she gets an urgent message. And of course, MaoMao probably thinks that it's something to do with her dad or the brothel. She's like, where should I go? And she's led immediately to Lihaku. I love that MaoMao was really concerned, like something desperately, urgent had happened. And instead it's Lihaku being like, how do I buy a girlfriend? But I love that anytime any male character in this series is serious, they do the Gendo pose. Lihaku does it once. Jinshi does it like every single episode. And I'm like, okay, the hardcore Gendo pose reference is just great. But MaoMao, I love that that's the urgent message. And she just like, the bag falls off her shoulder. She's like, really? This is what I came for? Now, of course, Jinshi has to show up when she's in the middle of examining his muscles. Now, the thing is, they don't exactly say which of the courtesans are getting bought out. It's really cute that Lihaku immediately thinks that it's Pairin because he thinks she's the best one, which is great. But we didn't exactly get confirmation of which one had the offers. It was just speculation on MaoMao's part. But the point was, this was all testing Lihaku's like love for Pairin and the risks and lengths he was willing to go to be able to buy her out. Now, of course, they actually finally do give like a dollar amount saying that she would cost $10,000 to buy out because, you know, that's just what those courtesans are worth. But she says she has two longtime candidates. The first one is the wealthy merchant who essentially looks like the old man in Best in Show, that movie where it's like, Jennifer Coolidge's character. She's like married to the wealthy old man. He's like 80 and she's just there for his money. We talk about soups. Like I feel like Pairin and him, like if they were in a relationship, it'd just be for money. And she'd be like, okay. And then the other guy's in his 30s. So he's more her age and he's a high ranking official. He actually looks pretty handsome. And it seems like, he's good in bed, but doesn't have a lot of stamina. And she's like, oh, which normally, you know, a guy that's good in bed that doesn't have a lot of stamina, that wouldn't be a problem. But for Pairin, girl's got some, she's got some bloodlust and she wants to, get it on all the time, which good for her. Luckily for her, Lihaku would probably be ideal candidate to like match her in that regard. She's a great dancer, but she is also as famous as an invincible warlord in bed. Girl is basically very sexually active and very happy about it and seems like she's pansexual and does not care who you are. As long as she's hungry, she'll have anybody. So good for her. I also like that Lihaku, he doesn't judge her for that. That's probably the part that I like most about him in this episode is that anybody else, she's a sex worker. She does sell her talents, but she's also selling her body and she has lots of partners and they're paying her. So, somebody that's possessive might frown upon that and try to like take her all for themselves. But Lihaku, that's not really the reason he wants to buy her out. It's mainly because he's afraid that someone else will take her away and he won't be able to see her anymore. And that's, genuine love from him. So he doesn't judge her for her many partners. He just doesn't want her to go away and him not be able to talk and be with her anymore. And it's like, you sweet guy. And so MaoMao's like, I want to make sure that you're, a person that is worthy of her. So MaoMao then says, but she's like, I'm not sure she would just leave the house. She says, until my dad took me in, the ones who took care of me at the house were the old woman and the three sisters. So it shows MaoMao as a little wee baby because obviously they took her in when the mom had her, right? And then MaoMao says Pairin, who was able to lactate despite having never given birth, essentially nursed MaoMao as a baby and was kind of like her pseudo mom. So that's why her and Pairin are so close. So that makes a little bit more sense now. And I'm like, what? So I did look it up. It says she's almost like a mother to me. And it's like, okay, which is super cute. She's like, I don't know what her thoughts on the matter are, but thinking back on those days, I do think that it's a bit of a waste. She's definitely lustful, but she's also equally maternal. Like, she could have a kid of her own, but that's not the thing. And Lihaku's like, well, but what's the deal? And MaoMao's like, oh, well, you're pretty serious about her. So he understands that Pairin, what she does for work, but he still is in love with her, which is pretty rare, right? So I looked it up. I wanted to see. I was like, okay, can you lactate when you're not pregnant? Because that seemed crazy to me. And the first thing I went to, which was the Cleveland Clinic, said that it is possible to lactate if you're not pregnant, but it's a complex process that usually involves hormone mimicking drugs that are used for several months to produce milk. And I'm like, well, that doesn't seem right, because in this fantasy story, they're not hormone inducing drugs. We need something a little more natural. So I did some more digging, and I found through Medical News Today, they talked about a condition called galactorrhea. Galactorrhea is a form of lactation that is unrelated to the milk that a woman produces when breastfeeding. People may worry about unexpected nipple discharge, but there's no link between this and breast cancer. And so they talk about how the hormone prolactin causes lactation during pregnancy and while breastfeeding. People who have galactorrhea can produce too much prolactin. It's tied to the pituitary gland. And it said it's a small gland at the base of the brain. It makes and regulates prolactin and several other hormones. Problems with the pituitary gland can sometimes cause people who are not pregnant to lactate. So she might have a pituitary malfunction, but it can cause her to lactate. And basically, they also talked about other ways and other causes of it. Could be excessive breast and nipple stimulation. Well, if she is an active woman in the bedroom, part of that act might involve breast or nipple stimulation, which could help contribute to it. I'm just saying, right? It also said an underactive thyroid or some types of hormonal issues. It even said that in men, testosterone deficiency can cause it as well. So there you go. But yeah, so basically this condition, galactorrhea, could be what Pairin has, but that would cause her to be able to lactate. And it did say that infants could drink the milk from it because it's basically the same hormone creating milk. It's just happening unnaturally or out of sequence with the body. So that is your science of the day. I learned something too. I was like, okay. So that's basically how Pairin was able to breastfeed MaoMao growing up. So Pairin's a lot older than she looks, because if we're thinking about this, if we're looking at this correctly, MaoMao is at least 17, 18 years old. Let's err on the side of thing and say she's 18. And then let's say that Pairin was at least 18 when MaoMao was a baby, but she was probably a little older. Like, girl is 36. So she's my age. So she's about ready to retire from that business. And that all makes sense now. Interesting. But yeah, Lihaku, he understands what Pairin does for work, but he's still in love with her. He can be a dumb dog, but he's an honest, hard worker. He is a Labrador. Trying to get promotion for his girl is adorable, if stupid. Which, he's trying to get promoted so he can be with her, which that's adorable. But he has astonishing stamina. So MaoMao's like, She's like, I don't know about this whole doing things for love business, but as far as being attractive to Pairin, he's checking off a lot of boxes. Like, he seems the type that might be suited for this. He's got a lot of stamina. He's got a good body. He seems like he likes her for all the right reasons. So she wants to check and see how his body looks, especially after she tells him 10,000 silver. And he just looks like he's going to collapse because he's like, I make about a tenth of that in a year. But you know what? I want this to be a true love story. I want him to save up his money. And even if they're in their 40s, I want him to be able to buy her out so they can be together. I think that's romantic. Like, do this, Leihaku. Go ahead. But I love his reaction. And I love the men on the outside of the door that are like not listening, but kind of listening to see what's going on. So she's like, look, she might take you for less if you're the right kind of guy, but we got to make sure you got to take off your clothes. We got to examine your body. Something else I really like about this series too is that she tells him, take off your pants, take off your shirt. I want to see you in just your tidy whities, and you got to flex for me. He does not only hesitate at all, but it's not viewed as sexual between them at all. They are literally platonic friends. They are platonic friends. There is nothing sexual about them. She's just doing this to help him. It's kind of amazing. Poor Jinshi just misunderstands when he walks in the room. But it is actually really cute. I was like, girl, she's like, not bad. And I like all the workers like, what in the world? The guy's outside. And also when she like zooms in on his nether regions, she's like, got good musculature. She reminds me a lot of, Uh, oh gosh, her name's gonna escape me. She's from Kuroko's Basketball. Riko. She reminds me of Riko from Kuroko's Basketball. Her whole family are able to like look at different athletes and kind of know their body dimensions and how that translates to their efficiency on the court. I feel like MaoMao and Riko would have a lot of fun. MaoMao would be like, I can judge a body just by looking at him. Riko's like, I know, right? So basically, MaoMao's doing her evaluation. I love that she tells him to take off the final garment. And she's like, go ahead, remove it. It feels like a JoJo's pose. And right when that's about to happen is when Jinshi walks in and just sees Lihaku standing there, almost stark naked, and MaoMao's pointing at his junk. The worst time he could enter. The worst time he could enter. But yeah, and I love that Jinshi's like, what are you doing? Like, he's reprimanding MaoMao. He's like, what are you doing with this naked man? And MaoMao's like, I don't know why you're so upset about it. She's like, I'm just checking his body out to know the proportions to see if my, like, foster mother is going to be with him. She's like, I was summoned to give an opinion on the matter. I was summoned for an evaluation. I love how stern Jinshi is. He's just like, why are you with this man? What are you doing? He's so stern. And Gaoshin is in the corner looking just exhausted. Gaoshin is like, I could explain what the misunderstanding is, but Jinshi wouldn't listen to me, and we need to just let this play out. Let these two lovebirds have their moment. I do think it's interesting that Jinshi has the jealousy trope. MaoMao could not be jealous of anyone. I don't think she'd care if Jinshi went on dates or whatever. She'd be like, okay. But Jinshi, he is super jealous. And the thing about it is he's not, I feel like Jinshi is jealous in a way that I can really digest, because sometimes I don't like when partners in relationships, and especially in fiction, are jealous because they usually take it to the extreme. But what I like is that Jinshi he trusts MaoMao. She just puts herself in situations that would lead you to not trust her. And she does no favors to herself, because she's like, oh, I was just checking out his body. And then she doesn't say the rest of the sentence until 2 minutes later. And Jinshi's already came up with all these conclusions in his head. So it's like, oh my God. And she's like, nothing improper was going on. And I love that she's like, I was just taking a good look. And his face, he's like, what do you mean a good look? And Gaoshin's like, oh my God. Poor Jinshi. He's like, oh, a good look. And she's like, yeah, I can like tell somebody's physique and personality just by looking at them. Appearances are only part of what defines a person. And Jinshi just face palms and stumbles away like a woman in Victorian literature just wafting into the distance. I'm like, hilarious. And of course, some of the parts that MaoMao tells us, the audience, that she's doing it for Pairin, she doesn't say out loud, so Jinshi doesn't exactly know until he pries the information out. But I love that he's like, well, can you look at my body and exactly see how I measure up? And what's so great is in that moment, MaoMao connects the dots. And she's like, oh, he's jealous. And she's like, well, I could, but what would be the point in that? You're not marrying Pairin. And then he's like, wait, what? So then that leads everything to be solved and the miscommunication to be measured up. So it's like, okay, good. Good. Glad we got that settled. I'm glad we figured out what to do. But I like how she's like, he just wants to brag that he's prettier. And it's like, no, he just wants to make sure that you're not persuaded by Lihaku to go think he's more attractive than him. He's trying to be wooed by you. And she's like, okay. And so that's when I like that we immediately cut to Lihaku doing stress sit-ups, which is a thing. I've seen people do stress sit-ups before. And it's like, you're stressed and anxious. You're like, I'm just going to do some sit-ups to feel better. And he's like, I'm wasting time when Pairin could be bought out. He's like, but I'm not capable of doing anything about it. I honestly thought that Lock-in was going to meet with him, because a lot of this situation seems very similar to Lock-in. The difference is, I feel as if you had these two situations. You had Lock-in and you had Lihaku. Lihaku was given like the deal with the devil. He was given the opportunity to get the money to buy her out. But that would be the very sleazy thing to do. And as Lihaku says, he couldn't consider himself a true man if he took someone else's money to buy her out. That wouldn't feel genuine. right? So he makes the decision. He's like, no, I'm going to work hard and I'm going to prove to her that I'm worthy of her and I'm going to try to buy her out on my own. Which, in the long run, as MaoMao points out, is probably going to lead her to let him buy her without the 10,000 for less because she'll know he's of integrity and worth it. Meanwhile, you have Locken, who did the not honorable thing and instead was like, well, if I can't have you, then no one will. And then ended up getting MaoMao's mother pregnant with her so that the other guys would back off, and it ruined her life. So I feel like it's a very good contrast of Locken's character versus Lihaku's character in this episode. And Jinshi is kind of like the middleman, which Jinshi is very much, he doesn't want to admit it, but he was kind of like Locken in this moment in this episode with his actions, especially him trying to like test Lihaku. I'm like, interesting. But he offers Lihaku twice the money to test his character, and Lihaku pulls it off. Also, I feel like part of this was to also test whether Lihaku was worthy of being around MaoMao. So I also feel like that was also part of it, because if Lihaku was the type of person that would, at the drop of a hat, I'm going to try to get to the point where he's saying here. I feel like with Lihaku, if he was the type of guy that could be easily bought out, then his character would be revealed in that moment. And I don't think Jinshi would trust him around MaoMao because he's somebody easily swayed. But because he not only proved himself with his character and his integrity, it made Jinshi go, okay, this guy not only really loves this Pairin woman and is probably going to leave MaoMao alone, but he's a man of integrity, so I can probably trust MaoMao being around him. Jinshi had multiple reasons for doing this, but I wanted to get back to this point in the conversation where Lihaku says Jinshi, I think his name was. He's rumored to be the emperor's favorite. It's so wild to me how everybody thinks that Jinshi is just this random eunuch and not the emperor's brother/son. It's so weird to me. It just blows my mind. And then he's like, well, thank you for your hospitality with my attendant the other day. When he says my attendant, I was like, don't you usually call her the apothecary? Like Jinshi kind of steps over his bounds a little bit to kind of get a little possessive of MaoMao. And I'm like, oh, ho, ho. And Lihaku's like, oh, you're quite welcome. And then he's like, I hear you're pursuing someone. And Lihaku's like, well, did she talk? And he's like, is that why he's smiling? He's like, well, at his young age, his high status, and being called the most beautiful person in the nation, which is hilarious. Not untrue, though. He says the matter of buying out a courtesan must be a joke to him. It's like, that's not what he's interested in. But I love that Lihaku is like, if he insults Pairin, I'm not going to stand for it. I'm like, look at you defending her. That's so sweet. So, yeah. And so then he offers him the money. And he's like, I'll lend you the money. He's like, but is it all right for you to give me this money when you barely know me? And then Jinshi says, my cat can be quite cautious. I was like, that, we don't see Gaoshin on the other side of the pillar when he says that. And I was like, Jinshi, you're getting a little possessive there, right? Like he drew his line in the sand and he was like, MaoMao's on my side. Don't be thinking that you're going to use her if, you're not of the right character. And he's like, and yet she's willing to give you advice and considers you a candidate for her sister's life partner. I'm like, Jinshi was being like, my assistant, my little cat, she's smart. And if she likes you, that must mean you're of good character. I was like, hearing Jinshi talk about MaoMao like that is crazy. And then Lihaku says, well, in other words, if your cautious cat lets her guard down around me, then that means I'm trustworthy. And Jinshi kind of tensed up when he said that. And they just looked at him like, are you, like, I'm the one that gets to call MaoMao that, not you. I was like, oh, Jinshi is not to be trifled with, especially if you're going to talk about MaoMao. And he's like, did I say something bad? And he's like, oh, well, I heard some stories about you. And he goes through like Lihaku's backstory, where he came from a good family. He's working his way up through the military. And then Lihaku's like, well, I kind of just stumbled into this by luck when I was pushed up in the ranks. And then he's like, well, wouldn't anybody want to have a good relationship with a promising officer? And Lihaku's like, well, that may be true, but I still don't have enough money. And I don't want to take his money either. I love that Jinshi is just ever so calmly staring at him like, Are you going to take the deal or not? Very much like Locken, and very, very, very sneaky. Also has kind of like a vibe from the Emperor too, right? And so he tells him, he's like, that is the woman, the only woman I love. To welcome a wife with someone else's money wouldn't make me the right kind of man. And Jinshi's like, oh, well, then we're good here. He's like, I have nothing to worry about. And so then Gao Shun's like, see? Gao Shun's like, sir. And Jinshi's like, see, there was nothing to worry about. And Gao Shun's like, we spent all of this time just to prove a point that MaoMao. I like that Gao Shun's like, we were proving a point that didn't need to be proven. We knew it was going to be all right, but you can't convince Jinshi of that. He's like, so I need to get back to my training. So then he like, it's like a damn rom-com. He talks about writing a letter to her, and then we see her with the flower pot, with the teapot, and he's like, and I love that Lihaku. Look at him. He's like, I can't force my will on her. I need to hear what she thinks. I'm like, our feminist icon. I was like, yes, please. Like, Lihaku's such a sweetheart. I love him. And then he like sees her and he looks up at the cherry blossoms and he's like, I don't care if her response is diplomatic, but her words will help me get through the days. And meanwhile, MaoMao is writing her as well, right? And then he manages to see her and it's so sweet. I love it. But yeah, he's like, I have to pursue her in a way that I believe in. I love that. It's sweet. I love that Lihaku's going to keep trying to get Pairin, and Pairin is probably going to be like, I'll take you for less than 10,000, you sweet little Labrador man. So then she writes back MaoMao and says, despite what the old lady thinks, I'm still in the game. Now, MaoMao probably didn't know that Lihaku was writing at the same time she was, right? She didn't know about Jinshi's meeting with him, so she probably didn't know that all that was going down. And then Pairin tells MaoMao, I'm waiting for my prince to come for me. Which is super sweet, right? MaoMao's like, okay. She's like, that's what I thought. Mm-hmm. If Pairin likes him, he won't need 10,000 silver. Oh. But then, she says, beyond that, it's just luck. But then there's like a little side note that says, when a certain someone came and talked about buying people out, I think one of the servant girls got the wrong idea. So all this rumor and whatnot could have been stemming from him showing up. So all this could have started because Locken showed up and spread false information. And that's when MaoMao crinkles up the letter. And she's like, that man, I don't want to think about that man. You know they're going to have to confront each other eventually. It's going to have to happen this season. She doesn't want to talk to Locken, but it's going to have to happen because otherwise I don't think she's going to be happy until she confronts him. Meanwhile, Locken is just in this state of depression, and the one guy who I think is his nephew says, I found you, and he's looking at these rose bushes that are dead and keeps saying blue roses. It's like Citizen Kane, where he's like, Rosebud. like that moment. Mm-hmm. He's like, blue roses. He's like, what did you say? And then we see part of the house blue as well. I'm so curious. Like, what is the deal with blue roses? Because, I mean, blue's the color of his eyes and MaoMao's eyes, but I've seen blue roses before, but I thought they were with dye or something. So maybe we'll get more of that next episode. But yeah, I loved this episode. It was so fun. I loved learning about the doctor. I loved Lihaku being a sweet golden retriever and Jinshi just being a mafia boss, like a mafioso here, as he's like making sure that he can trust Lihaku with MaoMao. And I'm like, oh my God, like just all the shenanigans. What this episode felt like was the episode before the final arc. It felt like that connective episode where we didn't have enough to just talk about Locken, we didn't have enough to just talk about Lihaku, and we didn't have enough to just talk about the doctor, so we sandwiched these little chapters together, and now we're gonna have to deal with Locken next episode, and maybe for the rest of the season, so... But I don't know. All I do know is that I'm excited to hear your comments down below. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'm back next week with episode 22 of the Apothecary Diaries. Bye.